Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Cosmic Bedtime. Tonight we ask a question that sounds simple, almost childish, until you sit with it in the dark. If we have already stood on the moon, why does going back feel so much harder than the first time we went at all? It is a strange kind of paradox, a door held open once, in your grandparents' lifetime, and then, without anyone quite noticing, allowed to swing shut again. Tonight is about that door and the long, unhurried walk back toward it. We have 4 regions to drift through tonight, 4 wide, dim rooms of thought, and you can let all 4 go, because I will carry them for you. First, we drift back to the door we once opened, remembering Apollo, the footprints, the flag stiffened with wire, and how the door quietly locked itself behind those closing boot prints without a sound. Then we follow the long road back, the plain physics of crossing that 250,000 miles again, the fuel and the patience and the machines that must be rebuilt almost from memory, like relearning a language spoken only once in childhood. After that, we arrive at the doorstep itself, the moon as it truly is, not a stage set, but a harsh, beautiful host, a place of extremes we must learn to live beside all over again. And last, we rest in the patient return, why this long walk matters at all, and how, patiently, across decades, we found the way back to the path. None of this asks anything of you. You do not need to remember a single fact, a single date, a single name of a machine or a mission. You do not need to hold on to the order of the regions, or which one came before the other, or whether the door was locked from the inside or the outside. Just let the words move past like something seen from a train window at night. Lights, then dark, then lights, again, none of them asking to be counted or kept. Somewhere in all of this, there is only one true feeling worth keeping tonight, and it is this: that distance is not the same as loss. The moon has not gone anywhere. It hangs exactly where it always has, patient above the rooftops, above the clouds, above whatever ceiling happens to be over you right now. We only stepped away from the door for a while, the way anyone might step away from a door they meant to walk back through, and then simply got busy, and years passed, and the busyness became its own kind of forgetting. If this kind of drifting helps you, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who are also lying awake somewhere tonight, staring at the same faint ceiling, wondering about the same faint sky. There is nothing here to hold on to, no task, no test, no thread to keep grip of. Let your hands go loose on the blanket. Let your shoulders ease down, away from your ears, down into the mattress, into the pillow, into the dark. Let your jaw unclench. Let your breath find its own slow rhythm, the one it already knows without being told. Settle in. Let's begin. Let the evening settle a little further now, until there is nothing left to hold but the window, and beyond the window, the one shape in the sky that has never once needed an introduction. There it hangs. The moon, exactly where it always hangs, a pale coin propped against the dark, patient the way only something ancient can be patient. You know this light. You have known it your whole life, through every version of yourself that ever lay in a bed like this one, watching it drift past the curtain's edge, sliding along the top of a fence, or resting for a moment in the branches of a tree outside a window that belonged to a much younger you. It has never asked anything of you. It has only ever been there, faithful in a way almost nothing else in the sky manages to be, waxing and waning on its own unhurried schedule, while the rest of your life rearranged itself completely around it. And there is a strange, tender fact folded inside that familiarity It is close. Not close the way a star is close, which is to say not close at all, but close the way a room down the hall is close, a mere 3 days' journey if you had the right kind of vehicle and the right kind of nerve. Over a distance, you could, in principle, drive in a very fast car within a week if roads existed in the dark between here and there. Human beings have walked on that ground. Human feet, in human boots, pressed their weight into that gray dust and left marks that are, even now, still there, undisturbed. Because there is no wind on the moon to blow them away and no rain to wash them into the earth. Whatever else changes tonight, that much will still be true when you wake. Footprints older than your parents, waiting in airless silence, exactly as they were left, holding their shape the way a single breath held gently in the chest can hold its shape, unhurried, for as long as it needs to. And yet, here is the small, honest paradox this whole night quietly turns around. The way a slow current turns a leaf without ever letting it go, we have not been back. Between the winter of 1969 and the winter of 1972, 12 people stood on the moon. 12, and only 12, in the entire span of human history, a number so small you could seat them all in a single unremarkable room, 12 coffee cups on a single table. 12 names you could recite before sleep took you if you wanted to, though you don't have to remember a single one. And since the last of those 12 lifted off the surface and looked back at it shrinking beneath him, no human eye has watched that dust up close. No human hand has touched it. Every year since has passed with the moon exactly this visible, exactly this near, and exactly this untouched. Children have been born, grown old themselves, and had children of their own, all beneath a sky where that door has simply stayed shut the entire time. Not because we forgot how, not because the will simply evaporated one afternoon and nobody noticed. In some single dramatic moment you could point to on a calendar, something quieter happened. Something more like the closing of a door that nobody was standing in front of at the time. A door that had been propped open by such extraordinary effort for such a narrow window of years that when the props were finally taken away, it swung shut on its own, softly, the way doors do when nothing is holding them anymore. And the latch caught, and for more than half a century now, it has simply stayed closed. Familiar, visible from every window on Earth, every single night the weather allows it. And, in its way, locked, not with force, not dramatically, but the ordinary way a door locks when a house slowly empties out and nobody remembers quite to prop it open again. That is the shape of tonight's question, and you do not have to hold it tightly, because there is nothing urgent in it, nothing that needs solving before you drift off. It is simply this: why did the way back grow harder when the way there was already walked once, in boots, by ordinary men who came home again to tell us how it felt underfoot? The moon did not move. The physics did not change. The distance between here and there is precisely what it always was, the same 3 days it has always been, unshortened by anything the passing decades brought us. So what closed, exactly, and when? And why has it stayed closed through every year since? Through your childhood and your parents' childhood, through so many ordinary Tuesdays when the moon rose the same as ever, and nobody thought to ask why no one was walking on it. Why the dust sat undisturbed while whole new generations learned to look up at it and simply wonder, the way you are wondering now. These are not frightening questions. There is no danger folded anywhere inside them, nothing sharp to brace against. They are more like the quiet questions you ask about an old house you used to live in. Why is that door locked now? When you remember, so clearly, walking through it as a child. The hinge creaking a particular way, the porch light left on for you. Tonight is not a night for urgency. It is a night for the long, unhurried walk back toward an answer. The kind of walk that has no destination it needs to reach before morning. Because the answer itself is allowed to arrive slowly, the way most true things do, a little at a time, gathering quietly in the background of your attention, until suddenly it is simply there, whole, the way sleep arrives, not chased down, but allowed. So let the thread of the night be this image, carried gently from paragraph to paragraph, the way a hand might carry a small warm stone, a familiar door, one you have seen your whole life without ever quite walking through it, standing exactly where it always stood. Closed now, but not forbidding, only waiting. The way a porch light waits for someone who is taking their time getting home. Everything in this story, every fact folded into it, is really just another few steps along that same unhurried path back to the door. There is no need to hurry the walking. There is no need to solve the lock before you rest. You are allowed, tonight, to simply notice the door and let your body settle a little deeper into the mattress as we start walking toward it together. Because to understand why the door swung shut, it helps first to remember, gently, without any need to summon detail or effort, how astonishingly it was ever opened at all. There was a season, once, when reaching the moon was not a question anyone asked with a shrug, but an answer an entire nation built, brick by brick, rivet by rivet, out of an urgency that gathered like weather and then, just as strangely, dispersed like weather too. It began not with the moon itself, but with a promise spoken aloud, a line drawn across the sky by a young president who said the words before anyone quite knew how they would be kept, and then, astonishingly, hundreds of thousands of hands, in workshops and laboratories and quiet drafting rooms scattered across an entire country, set about keeping them. Engineers who had never built anything like it. Machinists who wound wire by hand into the memory of a computer, because no factory yet existed that could do it faster or more precisely than human fingers. A rocket taller than almost anything human beings had ever stood upright, filled with more raw controlled power than the mind easily holds, waiting on a pad in Florida for the ignition that would, for a few years, make the sky feel closer than the next town over. That is where we turn next, backward, gently, into the era when the door first came open. When a design on paper became a living machine tall enough to blot out a hillside, and when a whole generation of ordinary particular people decided, together, that the moon was reachable, and then, improbably, proved it. You do not need to hold any of the numbers yet. You do not need to remember a single date, or a single name, or a single technical fact. Just let the picture arrive on its own, unforced, the way a memory arrives when you stop trying to summon it, a tower of metal standing against a bright morning sky, steam curling off it in the heat. Thousands of quiet, focused people watching from control rooms and rooftops and folding chairs on the grass, all of them holding their breath at once, the way you might hold yours now, just before the exhale that finally lets the whole day go and lets the night carry you the rest of the way. So let the mind drift back, past tonight's window, past the years lingering unhurried between now and then, to the moment the door first swung open. 12 people stood on that gray dust between 1969 and 1972, a span shorter than a single childhood. And to understand why the door has stayed shut since, it helps to feel, in the body, what it actually took to open it even once. Picture first the size of the key. Saturn V rose 110 meters from its pad, taller than most buildings you have ever stood beneath, a white column that seemed to belong less to an era of machines than to some patient, ancient idea of reaching. Feel its scale the way you might feel a tall tree at night, craning back until the top disappears. Not frightening, only vast. The way a cathedral ceiling is vast, built by hands to make you feel small on purpose. At launch, it produced more thrust than can easily live in ordinary language. But let the number rest, and keep instead the image, a structure heavier than a naval destroyer, lifting itself on a column of fire, carrying 3 people and their small capsule of air toward a place with no air at all. Behind that single tower stood something even larger and far less visible, a kind of vast, unhurried orchestra of human attention. Nearly 400,000 people, across more than 20,000 companies and universities and government labs, spent the 1960s bent over drafting tables and test benches and soldering irons, each one holding a tiny piece of the larger key. A seamstress in a factory in Massachusetts stitching wiring harnesses by hand. An engineer in Alabama running numbers on slide rules long before anyone trusted a machine with the arithmetic of a human life. A technician in Florida walking the gantry at 2 a.m, checking a single valve for the 100th time. Because at that scale of ambition, patience was not a virtue so much as a job description. Let yourself imagine all of them at once, a whole nation's worth of hushed concentration aimed at one impossible task. The way an orchestra tunes itself before the first note, not loud yet, just entirely aligned. To make room for that many hands, the country made room in its wallet too. At its peak, in the mid-1960s, NASA received roughly 4 cents of every federal dollar, a share so much larger than anything since that it can be hard, from where you rest tonight, to picture it at all. Think of it less as a number and more as a decision, an entire nation choosing, for a handful of years, to treat a walk on another world as urgent as a war, as necessary as a bridge or a hospital, worth almost $1 in every 25 that the government spent. That kind of devotion rarely lasts by nature. It is closer to holding your breath, sustainable for a sprint, not for a lifetime. And much of what made Apollo possible was precisely that it was allowed to be temporary. And it is worth resting for a moment on how strange and tender the engineering itself was, underneath all that scale. The guidance computer that would fly Apollo to the moon and back had a memory made not of silicon chips as we know them now, but of wire, actual copper wire, threaded by hand through tiny magnetic rings, one strand at a time, by rows of women working with needles not unlike the ones used for embroidery. They called it core rope memory, and it is a lovely, almost domestic image to hold in the dark, humanity's boldest leap outward, quite literally sewn into being, stitch by patient stitch, the same unhurried motion of hands making something durable out of thread. Once woven, that memory could not be changed. No editing, no rewriting, only what had been placed there with care before the rocket ever left the ground. It is a small, human detail worth keeping close. The most advanced flight computer of its age was, in its heart, a piece of very careful needlework. All of that effort, repeated and refined, carried 6 crews down to the surface and back home safe. A run of 6 successful landings out of 9 journeys that came within reach of the moon, an astonishing rate of success for something attempted for the very first time, by hand, with a fraction of the computing power now resting, unhurried, in a wristwatch. Each mission returned with its own tender cargo, Across all 6 landings, the astronauts gathered and carried home about 382 kilograms of moon, dust, and stone that had waited, untouched, for longer than human history has existed, some of it older than the Earth's oldest surviving rock. It sits today in vaults and museum cases, still unmoving, a small gray armful of proof that the walk was made. You might picture it now not as rock at all, but as a kind of letter home, carried across that quiet distance and set down gently on this side of the door. Inside the great room, where it was all watched over, rows of consoles glowed low and green, each one tended by a controller no older, on average, than someone just beginning a career, trusted anyway with a life riding on their calm attention. Headsets murmured a private language of numbers and call signs back and forth across that room, unhurried on the surface, even when the seconds beneath the words were anything but, because the whole culture of that place had trained itself to sound level no matter what the instruments were saying. Families gathered in living rooms, lit only by television static, to watch a fuzzy gray figure step down a ladder, and for a few minutes, something like 500 million people across the world were looking, all at once, at the same small screen, all breathing in time with the same distant, careful footstep. There is something worth holding on to in that image on a night meant for rest, not the tension of the moment, but the togetherness of it, an entire species pausing its ordinary evening to watch one of its own set foot somewhere new, and then simply going back to bed. Even the fuel itself carried its own patient arithmetic of care. Saturn V burned through roughly 20 tons of propellant every second in its first minutes of flight, a rate almost impossible to hold in the mind, yet every gram of it had been measured, tested, and accounted for months in advance by people who treated a decimal point the way a jeweler treats a stone, with total, unblinking respect. Nothing about Apollo was improvised. Every risk that could be found in advance was hunted down on paper first, in simulators, in endless dry runs, so that by the time 3 astronauts sat atop that tower of fire, the danger remaining was only the danger that no amount of patience could remove, the honest kind that comes with any true frontier, that is worth remembering gently now. In the dark, even humanity's boldest leaps are, underneath, made mostly of care, of thousands of small, careful checks stacked one on another until they can carry the weight of something enormous. None of it, the tower, the hundreds of thousands of hands, the 4 cents on the dollar, the hand-sewn memory, was ordinary. And none of it was meant to be permanent. It was built inside a very particular kind of urgency, the sort a society can summon perhaps once in a generation, half competition, half wonder. A narrow window when a nation decided that reaching a far shore mattered more than almost anything else it could do with its money and its years. That window will very likely never open in quite the same way again, and there is no need to feel any grief in that thought tonight, only a kind of tender respect, the way you might feel toward an elder who once did something extraordinary and difficult and does not need to do it again to have done it. And so, the missions went on, one after another, each a little more confident, a little more at ease on that gray ground, until December of 1972, when the last footprints of that era were pressed into the dust of the Taurus, Littrow Valley. Apollo 17 lifted away from the surface, carried its crew back across that long hushed distance, and splashed down safely in a warm ocean, and something the world had grown almost used to simply stopped. There was no announcement that the door was closing, no headline that said this is the last time for a while, only a soft settling. The kind that comes after a long piece of music ends and the room does not yet know whether to clap or simply listen to the silence it has left behind. The launch pads stood a little emptier. The nightly news moved on to other things. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, almost without anyone deciding it in a single moment, the great difficult key that had been so carefully forged began, piece by piece, to be set down. And after that last engine cooled on the pad, after the dust of Apollo 17 settled back onto ground no one would disturb again for what has become half a century and counting, something else began to happen, so unhurried it barely felt like an ending at all. The door did not slam. No single hand reached out and turned a bolt. It locked the way a house settles at night, click by faint click, each one small enough to sleep through, until one morning the whole frame is simply, quietly sealed. That is the part of this story that deserves your full, unworried attention now, because it explains so much of the wondering you may have carried without words for it, not who forgot the way to the moon, but how 100 small, reasonable decisions, made one at a time by tired, sensible people, added up to a door nobody meant to lock. Picture it first as a matter of breath, of air going out of a room slowly rather than all at once. At its highest point, in the mid-1960s, NASA's share of the entire United States federal budget touched somewhere near 4%, an extraordinary portion of a nation's collective effort, funneled for a few years into reaching one small gray world in the sky. You do not need to hold that number tightly. Simply feel the size of it, the way a held breath feels different from an ordinary one. And then, gently, across the years that followed the landings, that share exhaled. It fell past 1% and kept easing downward, and today it rests under 1/2 of 1%, a fraction so slender it could almost hide inside the number that came before it. No one voted to make the moon unreachable. They voted again and again for other quiet, reasonable things, and the total of all that quiet reasonableness was a program that could no longer afford, in any sustained way, to keep building what it had built before. And what had been built was staggering in a way numbers alone cannot quite carry, so let the picture hold it instead. Imagine, if you like, an entire assembly line the length of a small town, humming through its days, women and men bent over consoles and drafting tables and rows of copper wire, hand-woven, thread over thread, into a kind of textile memory for a computer no larger than a suitcase. This was core rope memory, literal fabric holding the instructions that would fly a ship to another world, sewn by hands the way a grandmother might sew a quilt, patient stitch after patient stitch. Multiply that single image by hundreds of thousands of people across the country, each one a single point of light in a constellation, built for one shared purpose, and you begin to sense the scale of what existed, and then, slowly, did not. Because a workforce like that is not a switch. It cannot be paused and later resumed with the flick of a hand. It is made of individual lives, individual choices about what to do next, and once the great collective task no longer needed them in the same numbers, those lives moved on, as lives sensibly do, toward mortgages and children and the next contract, the next decade. So the assembly lines themselves came down, tool by enormous tool, the great jigs and dies that had once shaped Saturn V's skin folded up, sold for scrap or simply left to rust in fields. Because keeping a factory alive costs almost as much whether it builds one rocket a year or none at all, and none at all is what the country gently chose. Beneath that main line sat thousands of smaller companies too. Little workshops and family firms scattered across the country, each one holding some single specific piece of knowledge: how to cast a particular alloy, how to weld a particular seam so it would not fail under the particular violence of a launch, and when the big contracts thinned, so did they. Closing their doors one by one, their knowledge going wherever unused knowledge quietly goes, into retirement, into other industries, into silence. Think for a moment of just one of those small companies, somewhere in a modest industrial town, 3 generations of a single family perhaps, who had spent years learning to machine one particular valve to a tolerance finer than a human hair. A valve that meant nothing on its own, but meant everything once it sat inside a fuel line, carrying a crew toward orbit. When the great contracts thinned, that family firm did not fail loudly. It simply took on other work, automotive parts, farm equipment, anything steady, and the valve and the tolerance and the years of trial that had taught them how to hold it drifted quietly out of the story. Multiply that one workshop by thousands, scattered from coast to coast, and you begin to feel the true shape of what dissolved, not a single failure, but an entire fine lattice of small, specific competencies, each one holding up a corner of the whole, each one letting go at its own unhurried pace. And this is perhaps the softest, most easily missed click of all the locks that closed that door. Knowledge itself is not paper. You can save a blueprint in a drawer for 50 years and open it again exactly as it was, every line precise, every measurement waiting. But so much of what let Saturn V fly safely lived nowhere but in hands, in an engineer's memory of the particular hiss a fuel line makes just before it's tightened correctly, in the unwritten feel a welder develops after the 1000th weld. The kind of knowing that never quite makes it into a manual, because no manual could hold it. That is called tacit knowledge, and it does not transfer through documents. It transfers only through one person standing beside another, showing, correcting, nodding when it's finally right. Across long afternoons in a workshop that no longer exists, as those engineers retired, as they moved into their own quiet later years, tending gardens now instead of gantries, so much of that unwritten expertise simply retired with them, resting now the way any long life's work eventually rests, folded away, still theirs, no longer transferable. So you can hold the blueprints of Saturn V in your hands today, every drawing intact in an archive, and still, in a very real sense, not be able to build the rocket, because a rocket, you might come to feel tonight, was never really a drawing at all. A rocket is a living thing before it ever leaves the ground, a vast, breathing supply chain of specific alloys from specific foundries, specific tolerances, known only by specific hands, a whole ecosystem of small suppliers and larger primes, and the invisible threads of trust running between them, all of it alive together at once. The way a forest is alive. Not just its trees, but its soil, its fungus, its insects. Everything working in a quiet interdependence you'd never notice until it stopped. And that particular forest, the one that grew around the goal of reaching the moon, was allowed to go still. Its clearings grew over. Its paths grew faint. Nothing about it was destroyed in anger. It simply stopped being tended. Because the people holding the shears turned, with entirely reasonable eyes, toward other horizons. Those other horizons had names, and they were not unworthy ones. The nation's gaze lifted instead toward the space shuttle, a vehicle built not to leap outward, but to circle close to home, ferrying crews and satellites in wide, patient loops a few hundred kilometers up, and toward the long, steady work of low Earth orbit, space stations, laboratories, Decades of learning how humans might simply live up there, rather than visit somewhere far. There is nothing sad in this, only a shift of attention. The way a household might spend years building a garden close to the house before ever again planning a long journey. But it meant that for 2 full generations, the particular muscles needed to leave Earth's gravity well entirely. To cross that quiet 3-day distance and set a human foot down on other ground were allowed to soften, unused, resting the way any strength does when it is not called upon. So here is where you can let this part of the story settle, without any weight to it, before it turns into something new. The door locked not through loss exactly, but through drift, the ordinary drift of attention and resources, and human lives moving where they were needed most at each particular moment. And the sum of all those small, sensible turns away simply left the path overgrown behind them. And if a path has grown over, the walk back to it cannot begin by wishing the old road were still clear. It has to begin somewhere sturdier than memory, somewhere that never drifted at all, no matter how many decades passed, no matter how many budgets rose or fell. It has to begin with the road itself, not the one built by hands, tools, and factories, all of which can dissolve, but the one written into the universe long before anyone thought to leave it. The quiet, unchanging physics of distance and gravity and motion, waiting now, patient as ever, for the walk to start again. And if the old road really has grown over, if the suppliers and the hand-taught engineers really have gone the way all faint, half-remembered things go, then the walk back has to begin the only place it can, with the road itself, the one part of this story that never changed, that was never dismantled, because it was never built by any government or company to begin with. It was simply distance, 384,400 kilometers on an ordinary night, between the window you might be lying near and the pale shape hanging above it. Say the number to yourself, unhurried, and it stays only a number. Feel it instead as a length of rope paid out across the dark, unspooling further than any of us can truly picture. And you begin to sense why the walk back to that particular door was never going to be a short one, no matter how many times it had been made before. But the true cost of that distance was never really about miles. Space does not charge in miles, it charges in speed. Think of Earth not as a place you simply leave, but as a shape in the dark that curves everything toward its center, a wide, invisible bowl that every falling thing eventually settles into, a valley with no bottom you can rest against, only a long, unbroken curve. To leave it at all, a vehicle first has to climb the walls of that bowl fast enough that it stops falling back down, and the walls of this particular bowl are steep in a way no hillside on Earth could ever be. Steep not in angle, but in effort, in the sheer patient accumulation of speed required before the climbing can even be said to have finished. That is the first toll, reaching orbit, moving sideways around the planet at some 8 kilometers every single second, fast enough that the ground keeps curving away beneath you as quickly as you fall toward it, so that falling and missing become, in a sense, the same unhurried motion repeated forever, a kind of endless graceful stumble that never quite lands. Only once that toll is paid does the second one arrive, the reach for the moon itself, a further push called the trans-lunar injection burn, a few minutes of engines firing that bend an orbit around Earth into a long, patient arc, reaching outward across that same rope of distance, aimed at where the moon will be, days from now, not where it is tonight. picture that burn the way you might picture leaning your whole weight into a heavy door at the top of a hill. Not a sudden shove, but a controlled, deliberate lean, sustained just long enough to send your body gliding the rest of the way on its own. After those few minutes of fire, the engines fall silent, and there is nothing left to do but coast, carried by the momentum already given. The way a stone continues across a lake's surface long after the hand that threw it has gone quiet. This is the part of any lunar mission that looks, from a bedroom window, almost peaceful, a metal shape drifting in hush between one world and the next. And yet everything about how far it can drift, how much it can carry, how many people can ride inside it, was decided in the seconds before that hush began. In that single costly act of climbing away from home. And this is where the walk back reveals its hardest, most unbending law. One that has nothing to do with politics or budgets or memory. One that would remain exactly true even if every blueprint and every retired engineer had somehow stayed precisely where they were. It is called, almost affectionately, by the people who spend their lives working around it, the tyranny of the rocket equation. It says, simply, that to change your speed by any given amount in the emptiness of space, you must carry fuel, and that fuel itself has weight, and that weight must also be pushed. Which means yet more fuel is needed just to move the fuel already carried, which in turn needs more fuel again. Climbing on itself almost without end, each answer producing a slightly larger question beneath it. A rocket bound for the moon is not in truth a vehicle that happens to carry some fuel. It is fuel, almost entirely, wearing a vehicle the way a coat is worn. A slender, precious cargo of crew and instruments tucked into the very last, smallest fraction of the whole standing structure, with nearly everything beneath it built only to be spent and let go. There is a gentler word for this whole hushed arithmetic, one worth holding on to, rather than the equation itself, delta V, which simply means a budget of change in speed, an allowance to be spent carefully across a journey the way a traveler might portion out the hours of a long, unhurried walk. Every part of the trip draws from that same allowance, leaving Earth's pull, bending the path toward the moon, later slowing again to be caught by it, and slowing once more to land softly rather than fall. There is no refueling station along that rope of distance, no resting bench halfway up the hill. Whatever budget of speed a vehicle carries when it leaves the ground is the only budget it will ever have. And every gram of fuel used to lift some unnecessary gram of metal is a gram that cannot later be spent on the parts of the journey that matter most. The slowing down, the setting down with care, the coming home again after. Think of it the way a traveler on foot thinks of water in a canteen on a long dry crossing. Not something to spend freely in the first easy hour simply because the path feels level, but something rationed with a kind of patient, almost tender discipline, because the traveler already knows, from the very first step, exactly how many hours of walking lie ahead, and exactly how little margin there will be for thirst later on. A rocket's tanks are that canteen, sized and weighed and argued over for years before a single engine ever ignites, because there is no well to find along the way, no shade to rest in, nothing but the arc already chosen, and the fuel already sealed inside the hull. You do not need the mathematics to feel the shape of it. Imagine, instead, the particular tiredness of a long uphill walk taken with everything you own strapped to your back, how the weight of the food and water you carry for the later miles presses down on the earlier ones, how a path that looked, from a distance, like a simple straight line to a door on a hill, reveals itself, step by step, to be almost entirely about what you are willing to carry and what you must leave behind. Every layer set down along the way, a coat no longer needed, a container already emptied, makes the next stretch of the climb a little easier, a little lighter, and a rocket does exactly this in the open dark, shedding whole tanks and engines the instant their fuel is spent, letting each spent stage fall away behind it, like a coat dropped at the bottom of a hill it will never climb again. That is the real reason 384,400 kilometers has never been the honest measure of this journey. The honest measure is how much of the vehicle must be sacrificed, burned, dropped away stage by stage, just so a small remaining piece of it can arrive with enough speed left in its budget to slow down again, safely, on the other side. It is worth resting a moment on how strange and how fair this law actually is. It does not care what decade it is, or which country is asking, or how many people once knew how to build a Saturn V by hand. It applied exactly this way in 1969, and it applies exactly this way tonight, unmoved, unhurried, indifferent to memory or ambition alike. The one part of the whole difficult return that was never lost, because it was never a matter of knowledge slipping away. It was simply always this expensive, every single time, for everyone, in every era, on every world, with enough gravity to notice a thing trying to leave it. Perhaps this is a small comfort in itself, that the door was never locked out of forgetfulness in any complete sense, but partly by a toll that has stood at the same fixed price since before anyone alive was born, a toll that has to be paid freshly by each generation that wants to walk that stretch of hushed distance again. And so, faced with that same old, patient, unbending toll, a new generation of vehicles has had to be shaped almost entirely around the discipline of paying it, enormous at their base. Tapering as they rise, most of their great standing height, nothing more than tanks built to be emptied and let fall away, stage after stage, so that the very last, smallest part of them might slip free of the bowl, coast in hush across the rope of distance, and arrive at the end of the long uphill walk, with just enough left in its own faint budget of speed to knock, gently, on the door. And once that toll is understood, once you feel, in your own chest, the honest weight of climbing away from a planet that does not want to let you go, the question changes shape. It is no longer only about distance. It becomes a question of what kind of key can be cut to fit a lock this old, this specific, this unforgiving of shortcuts. Because here is the tender, almost surprising truth at the center of tonight's story. The door was not simply left unlocked and waiting. New keys had to be forged, one slow tooth at a time, by people who were not even born when the last boot print was pressed into that gray dust. Picture, if you like, a hangar the size of a cathedral, quiet at this hour, its steel ribs holding the hush of a building built for something enormous. Inside it stands the space launch system. Sledges, tall as a skyline, engineered specifically to shoulder the weight of leaving Earth on a lunar heading. It is not the Saturn V reborn. It only resembles that old giant the way a grown child resembles a photograph of themselves as an infant. Same bloodline, same purpose, but built from an entirely different set of hands, materials, and decades. Perched atop it rides Orion, a spacecraft shaped almost like a gentle echo of the old Apollo capsules. A blunt cone designed to carry a crew safely across the 250,000 miles, and just as importantly, to carry them home again through the fire of return. And waiting separately, meeting the crew only near the moon itself, is Starship, vast, silver, still finding its footing through trial and fire on distant test stands, chosen to be the vehicle that actually lowers astronauts the last stretch down to the surface, the final tread on the final stair. You might wonder, drowsily, why we do not simply rebuild the Saturn V. The blueprints exist somewhere, after all, in careful archives, in microfilm, in patient boxes, kept safe the way an old letter is kept safe long after the person who wrote it has gone. But a rocket, you may remember from earlier, was never only a drawing. It was a living, breathing supply chain of hands and factories and singular machines, and that chain dissolved decades ago, link by link, the way a path through tall grass disappears when no one walks it for long enough seasons. The specific alloys used in the 1960s are no longer forged the same way. The specific machinists who welded those enormous fuel tanks by feel, by decades of accumulated instinct, have long since retired, and much of what they knew never made it onto paper at all. It lived only in their hands, and it left quietly with them, the way any craft passed down by touch rather than text eventually does. Even if every drawing survived intact, down to the smallest rivet count, you would still be missing the wordless knowledge of how to actually bend that metal into something that flies. And that knowledge cannot be photocopied, only relearned, slowly, by a new generation willing to make its own mistakes. There is a second, quieter reason the old rocket cannot simply be summoned back into being, and it has nothing to do with metal at all. An entire ecosystem of small companies once fed the Saturn V program. Machine shops, seal manufacturers, instrument makers, thousands of them scattered across the country, each holding one tiny piece of the whole. The way a single stitch means little until you notice it belongs to an enormous quilt. When the Apollo era ended, that ecosystem did not go into hibernation, waiting patiently to be woken. It closed its doors, sold its tooling, and turned its hands toward other work entirely. Rebuilding Saturn V today would mean rebuilding, from nothing, a landscape of expertise as much as a machine, which is precisely why the engineers of this new era chose, instead, to design something new around the tools and knowledge they actually have in hand tonight, rather than the ones a vanished generation once held. And beyond the vanished hands, the rules themselves have gently but completely changed shape. Safety standards drawn up in the Apollo era would not satisfy anyone building crewed spacecraft today. Risk that was once accepted as the unavoidable cost of a great race is no longer accepted at all. Not when there is time to build things more carefully. The avionics belong to another century entirely. Apollo's guidance computer, remarkable as it was for its moment, held less memory than a single greeting card that sings a tune. Its instructions, once literally woven by hand, wire through tiny magnetic rings, thread by patient thread. Today's spacecraft think instead in the hushed, instant language of modern silicon, layered with redundancy, self-checking, quietly capable of computations Apollo's engineers could not have dreamed of asking for. So the key cannot simply be copied from the old one. It has to be filed fresh, from new metal, cut to fit a lock whose mechanism has, in its own way, also evolved. Even the smallest details carry that evolution inside them. The screens a crew watches are no longer dials and switches lit by filament bulbs, but soft touch panels that can be reconfigured with a whisper of code. The parachutes that will lower Orion into the sea have been tested and retested against decades of new understanding about how fabric behaves under strain. The heat shield that must survive re-entry at speeds faster than any capsule returning from low orbit has been built from materials Apollo's engineers never had the chance to imagine. None of this is showier than the old technology. Some of it, quietly, is simply wiser. And already, the new key has been tested against the door, if only to feel whether it turns. In late 2022, an uncrewed Orion capsule rode an SLS rocket beyond Earth, coasted out across that familiar 250,000 miles, swung in a wide, patient loop around the far side of the moon, farther from home than any spacecraft built for humans had ever traveled, and then turned back and came home, splashing gently into the Pacific beneath its parachutes. No one sat inside it. It carried instead sensors and quiet and the accumulated hope of thousands of people who had spent years bending metal and writing code toward this one uneventful, successful arc through space. Somewhere in mission control, rows of tired, patient faces watched numbers scroll past on their screens, waiting through days of silence for the capsule to reappear from behind the far side of the moon, out of radio contact, alone in the dark for the longest stretch any of them had endured. And when it did reappear, right on schedule, the room did not erupt so much as exhale. A held breath finally let go. Call it a first knock at the door, not yet an entry, but proof that the hinges, after half a century of stillness, still remember how to move. But here is the part that makes this particular walk back so much slower, so much more deliberate than the first one. The goal this time is not simply to visit. Apollo's astronauts came. They looked, they gathered what they could carry, and then, because the whole enterprise had been built for a single triumphant crossing of the threshold, they left and did not return. This time, the intention folded into every rivet and every line of code is different in its very nature: to arrive and to remain. To build not a single visit, but a foothold. A door that opens for one evening is a simple mechanism. A door meant to open again and again, for years, for different crews, for supply runs and long stays and quiet routine, requires a far heavier, far more deliberate key, one cut not just for entry, but for permanence. That is a harder thing to build than speed alone, harder than thrust alone. It is an entire architecture of return, layered underneath the physics like a second, quieter structure holding the first one up. So let the picture settle now into something almost tactile, a great rocket resting on its pad in the hush before dawn, fuel breathing faint vapor into cold air, a capsule at its tip built to carry a small crew where only 12 human feet have ever touched, and beyond it, waiting near the moon itself, a second vessel built to finish the descent. Each part of this new key has had to be earned separately, tested, flown, corrected, flown again, because nothing about crossing this particular threshold is allowed to be assumed. And when, at last, all of those separate pieces align, rocket, capsule, lander, crew, the moment comes that the whole night has been walking toward. The engines fire, the tower falls away beneath the capsule, and 3 people, or fort, begin to rise from the only world they have ever called home. What follows that departure is not urgency. It is something closer to stillness, a long, wide, silent crossing. 3 days adrift between one familiar sky and another, carried the way a sleeper is carried by a bed that asks nothing of them at all. Let your own breathing slow now, because that is exactly the kind of crossing waiting just ahead of us tonight, out past the last bright window of Earth, into the quiet dark, where the moon is already, patiently, beginning to grow larger in the glass. And for 3 days, the crew that rides that toll must simply be carried. The trans-lunar injection burn ends the way a long exhale ends, not with a jolt but with a release, the engines finishing their work and going silent, and silence itself becomes the sound of the whole spacecraft settling into its long glide. There is nothing left to fire, nothing left to push. The capsule is already moving fast enough to cross an ocean of dark in a handful of days, and now its only task, and the only task of everyone inside it, is to simply continue. You can let that word sit with you for a while. Continue, not strive, not steer, not manage. Continue. The way a stone continues down a hill once it has already been let go. The way a held breath continues to leave the body once the letting go has begun. Imagine yourself inside that capsule now, drifting near a window no larger than a dinner plate, your body unanchored from any particular direction called down. There is no floor pressing up into your heels, no chair holding the small of your back, and yet nothing is falling in the frightened sense of the word. Everything in the cabin, your body, a stray pen, a checklist drifting past like an easy leaf on unseen water, is falling together at the same unhurried rate toward nothing in particular, because there is nothing nearby large enough to insist upon a direction. This is what it means to be in freefall this far from home, not a plummet, but a suspension. Every part of you agreeing to move at exactly the same patient pace as everything around you, so that the falling disappears into something closer to floating in a warm, dark bath. Nothing pulls harder on one part of you than another. For perhaps the first time since before you were born, curled and weightless yourself in a smaller, warmer dark, gravity stops asking anything of your muscles at all. There is also a hush to it, though not the hush of emptiness. The cabin goes on humming with its own low systems, fans breathing somewhere behind a panel, a faint electrical warmth in the air. But every sound has gone unhurried, rounded at its edges, the way sounds soften when heard from underwater or from very far away. There is no wind to carry a voice off course, no footstep to announce anyone's arrival, because no one here is walking anywhere at all. Movement becomes something closer to drifting from handhold to handhold, unhurried and deliberate, a body learning a new, tender vocabulary for simply crossing a room. And in that hush, ordinary things begin to feel almost ceremonial. A sip of water, pulled from a pouch and held, trembling, as a small silver bead before it is caught between the lips. A photograph tucked to a wall by nothing more than a strip of tape, turning ever so faintly on its own, as if considering which way to face. This, more than anything, is the strange gift folded inside those 3 days, an entire body, released from the lifelong labor of holding itself up. On Earth, even at rest, even lying down for the night, some low architecture of muscle is always working. Small adjustments, small corrections, the endless faint hum of a body arguing gently with gravity simply to stay in one shape. Out here that hum falls faint, then fainter, then gone. The shoulders that never fully let go, let go. The arms find their own place and stay there, hovering, needing no support, no story, no attention. It is worth pausing on this. The deepest form of being held is not a hand that grips you, but a hand that simply matches your motion so completely that you forget you are being carried at all. That is what momentum is doing now, cradling the whole capsule and everyone in it at a shared, unbroken pace, mile after mile after mile, for 3 days that ask nothing of anyone, nothing to do. No burn to fire, no course to hold, no wheel to turn. The trajectory was set in the minutes after launch, and now simply plays itself out, obedient to laws older than any engineer. The same equations that let an apple leave a branch and a tide answer a distant moon. For the crew, this stretch becomes something closer to a held breath made comfortable, meals eaten out of pouches, sleep taken strapped loosely to a wall so the body will not drift into some instrument panel in the night, hours spent simply watching, because for once, watching is the whole of the job. You might think of your own bed this way, later, as your own body settles into it. A place that asks nothing of your muscles. A place where the mattress does what momentum is doing here, agreeing to carry your weight so completely that the carrying itself becomes invisible, becomes rest. And there, past the little round window, Earth performs its own unhurried retreat. It does not vanish, it simply diminishes, the way any lit room grows smaller and dimmer the further you walk from it, down a long dark hallway, until what was once a whole world containing every ocean and every mountain range and every person who has ever loved you becomes, at last, a single blue lamp left burning in a window, small enough to hide behind an upraised thumb. It goes on glowing, it goes on turning, unseen from this distance, through its ordinary day and night. But its claim on you has already begun to loosen, the 90-minute question of whether you belong on it fading into background hum, the way a familiar street noise fades once you are far enough down the block to only half remember it was ever loud. Time itself begins to behave differently out here, unmoored from the old markers that used to hold it in place. There is no sunrise to lean on, no dusk settling gold across a horizon, because there is no horizon left to catch the light, only a black so complete and so unbroken that the stars stop flickering altogether and simply burn, steady as pinholes in a dark curtain, undimmed by any trace of atmosphere to blur their edges. A day, out here, is whatever the crew decides to call a day, a stretch of hours bracketed by sleep, by a dimmed cabin light, by the small tender ritual of strapping oneself loosely to a wall so the body will not go wandering while the mind rests. And the ship glides on beneath it all, regardless, indifferent to whether anyone marks the hour, carrying its sleeping and its waking passengers alike at the very same unbroken, patient speed. Somewhere in the earliest hours of this crossing, almost too quickly to notice, the capsule passes through the Van Allen belts, two great invisible rings of charged particles that Earth's magnetic field gathers and holds around itself. A kind of storm cloud made of nothing you could touch. It sounds, said aloud, like something to fear. But the crossing is brief, timed and shielded, and already behind you almost before it is mentioned. One more threshold slipped through in the dark without ceremony, the way a sleeper crosses from one stage of the night into another without ever waking to notice the change. What lies ahead now is simply open space, no belts, no boundary, no threshold left to cross before the doorstep itself. Only distance, and the slow patient arithmetic of distance closing. This is Freefall's real secret, the one worth carrying with you as your own body loosens into whatever surface is holding it tonight, falling, done for long enough, without anything nearby to crash into, stops being an emergency, and becomes instead the purest form of trust the body ever practices. To free fall across 250,000 miles is to let momentum alone be your bed, your harness, your outstretched hand, no engine required, no effort spent, just the patient continuation of a motion someone else already set in place for you. The crew does not fight to stay aloft. They do not have to. They are simply allowed to be carried, hour after hour, meal after meal, sleep period after sleep period, while the ship keeps its own quiet appointment with a doorstep still far ahead. And little by little, without anyone doing anything to make it happen, that doorstep begins to change the view. Somewhere past the halfway point of the crossing, the ratio in the window starts to shift, Earth continuing to shrink behind, and ahead, framed in the same small glass, something pale beginning to widen. At first it is barely different from a bright star, then a coin, then something with a visible curve, a companion no longer distant but arriving, its gray seas and pale highlands resolving by the hour into a landscape rather than a light. The moon, which for so many nights has simply hung in place above a bedroom window, is here beginning to fill the frame the way a face fills a window when someone you love finally walks up the path toward the door. 3 days of nothing required of you, and now, at the far edge of that long, patient drift, the doorstep itself is close enough to notice its own texture. Close enough, soon, for the crew to see exactly what kind of ground is waiting to receive them. And there it is, filling the little window at last, no longer a coin of light, but a whole ground. Close enough now to have texture, close enough to have weather of its own kind, though it is not weather at all, and this is the moment to look honestly at the doorstep itself. Because a door that locked gently does not mean the threshold on the other side is soft. It helps to know the truth of it now, while you are still weightless, still held, still far enough away that none of it can touch you tonight. The ground waiting below is not sand. It only looks like sand from orbit, pale and rippled and inviting, the way a photograph of a fire looks warm. Up close, it is something else entirely. Every grain of lunar regolith was born in violence, shattered out of rock by impacts with no wind and no water ever arriving afterward to round its edges, no ocean to tumble it smooth the way a beach tumbles glass into something you could walk on barefoot. So each particle stayed sharp. Under a microscope, it looks less like sand and more like a field of tiny broken bottles, splinters of volcanic glass with edges that never wore down, because there was never anything there to wear them down. And it carries a charge. Sunlight strikes it and knocks loose a faint static hunger in the dust, so that it does not just sit on a boot, it reaches for one, drawn upward by the same quiet electricity that makes a balloon cling to a sweater. The Apollo astronauts felt this within days. It crept into the threads of their suit joints, worked its way past seals engineered by careful hands, and by the end of even a short stay, knees and wrists and gloves that had bent smoothly on Earth were beginning to grind. This is not told to frighten you, only to be honest. The way you would be honest with someone you loved about a long trip, naming the hard parts once, clearly, so they can be set down rather than carried the rest of the night. Engineers today study those worn Apollo gloves the way a doctor studies an old scan, learning from every scratch, redesigning seals and fabrics that can shrug off a grain built to cling. The dust is simply a fact of that ground. One more reason this walk back is being taken with such unhurried care. One more measurement folded quietly into a blueprint before anyone is asked to kneel in it again. And there is another fact, just as plain. Nothing slows a fall there but engineering. On Earth, the air itself does half the work of arriving anywhere. A parachute opens, catches an invisible cushion, and lets a spacecraft settle the last stretch almost gently. Borrowed motion soaked up by a sky thick enough to lean on. The moon offers no such kindness because it offers no air at all. No atmosphere means no drag, no resistance, nothing to bite into and slow a craft's long fall toward the surface. A capsule descending toward that ground cannot rely on cloth and rope the way it might coming home to Earth. It has to carry its own brakes the entire way down, in the form of fuel and a rocket engine pointed at the ground, burning in careful, throttled bursts to fight against a fall that would otherwise simply continue, all the way to impact. This is what a powered descent means. Not landing so much as an argument conducted in real time between gravity pulling one way and a plume of flame pushing the other, balanced by computers and human hands, until the two forces cancel and the craft simply, finally, stops. There is no room in that argument for guesswork. Every gram of descent fuel is accounted for long before launch, because there is no second chance to borrow more from the sky. It is a landing built entirely out of foresight, out of numbers checked and checked again back home, months before anyone climbs aboard, which is itself a kind of tenderness if you think about it. An entire team spending years of quiet calculation so that a few minutes of fire can end in stillness instead of catastrophe. Somewhere in a control room, far from that falling plume of light, a row of people will watch numbers tick downward on a screen, saying almost nothing, trusting work they finished long ago to carry a stranger safely the last few hundred meters home. Then there is the matter of temperature, which on the moon behaves like nothing your body has ever known. Because your body has spent its whole life wrapped in an atmosphere that evens things out, that carries warmth from the sunlit side of the planet around to the shadowed side, that keeps a summer afternoon and a summer midnight only some tens of degrees apart. The moon has no such blanket. Where sunlight lands directly, with nothing to filter or scatter it, the surface can climb to roughly 127 degrees Celsius, hotter than water boiling on a stove. And where the light does not reach, with nothing to hold even a trace of the day's heat, the ground can fall to nearly 173 degrees below zero, a cold so complete it belongs more to the space between stars than to any night you have shivered through. And that lunar night is not brief. Because the moon turns so unhurriedly on its axis, one stretch of darkness there lasts about 14 of your Earth days, 2 full weeks of that deep, unrelieved cold before the sun climbs back over the horizon and begins the long 14-day day that follows it. Every base, every habitat, every hopeful plan for staying must be built around this slow, patient rhythm of extremes, must find a way to store warmth through the long dark and shed it again through the long light, the way you, right now, are learning to hold warmth under a blanket while the room around you stays cool. 14 days of light, then 14 of dark, over and over. A rhythm so unlike your own that engineers speak of it almost the way you might speak of a very long breath. One slow inhale of sunlight, one slow exhale of cold, and the whole surface waiting patiently through both. And beneath all of this, quietly, constantly, there is the radiation. Because Earth's magnetic field, that invisible, generous shield you have lived inside every day of your life without ever once needing to think about it, does not reach the moon. Here, cosmic rays and the charged breath of the sun arrive at that surface, with nothing standing between them and the ground. Nothing bending them gently aside the way Earth's field bends them into harmless curtains of aurora at the poles. This is simply how it is, out past the shield, not a danger to dwell on, but a plain feature of the doorstep. One more reason a spacesuit and a habitat wall are built the way they are, thick and deliberate, doing on purpose what Earth's whole planet does for you automatically and for free. Name it once, set it down, and let it rest there among the other hazards, the glass-sharp dust, the flame-balanced fall, the vast swing between fire and frozen dark. None of these were ever hidden from the engineers rebuilding that key. They are simply why the key takes so long to cut, why every bolt and seal and layer of shielding is tested and retested before anyone is asked to trust their life to it. This is not a door that opens carelessly. It never was, even the first time. The 12 who walked there in the old era wore shields built by hand, trusted to slide rule arithmetic and instinct what today is checked 1,000 times over by machines that never tire and never blink. And yet, this is the strange grace hidden inside all of that difficulty. Someone does eventually stand on that harsh ground. Boots planted in the sharp old dust, suit humming quietly against the cold at their back or the heat at their front. And they lift their head and they look up, past the black sky, with no air to soften it into blue, past the sharp, unblinking stars that never learned to twinkle there. And what they see, hanging above that ancient broken glass and that 14-day dark, is home. Whole, blue, small enough to hide behind a thumb held at arm's length. Every person who has ever lived, every worry that has ever kept anyone awake at night, resting there together inside one modest circle of light in an enormous black room. The doorstep is harsh so that the astronaut can be standing somewhere honest when they finally turn and look back at where they came from, and what that looks like, what it does to the small, tender. Human heart doing the looking is worth staying with for a while, longer than a single breath, longer than a single thought, the way you might stay with the last warm minute before sleep finally arrives. And after all of that, the powdered glass, the 14-day nights, the plume of flame lowering a fragile body onto a place that offers no forgiveness for haste, there is a moment when an astronaut simply stops. Boots planted in dust that has waited billions of years for a footprint. Suit humming its low mechanical breath. And they turn, not toward the horizon, which on the moon curves away almost shockingly close, but upward toward the black. And there it is. Earth, whole, small enough to cover with a thumbnail held at arm's length, hanging against a sky with no atmosphere to scatter its light into blue, no clouds drifting past, to remind you it is only a photograph. It is not a photograph. It is the real thing, tiny and blue and swaddled in white, turning without a sound. This is the view they call Earthrise, though on the moon it does not truly rise the way a sunrise does at home. It hovers, fixed in the same patch of sky night after night, because the same face of the moon always looks back at us, tethered by the old, unhurried mathematics of tidal lock, a bond struck so long ago that neither world remembers a time before it. You have to walk to a certain edge, wait for a certain angle, to catch that blue circle lifting itself over the gray rim of a crater, the way the first photograph of it was caught almost by accident, through the window of a spacecraft circling in December of 1968. 3 astronauts pausing mid-orbit because something they had not expected to feel simply arrived and asked to be looked at. And when it happens, when that small marble edges into view above a landscape with no wind, no color, no sound at all, every person who has ever lived is inside it. Every home you have slept in, every window you have ever looked out of, wondering about the moon, is somewhere on that circle no bigger than a coin held up to starlight. Your whole life, contained in something you could eclipse with one raised hand. Say that again, unhurried, and let it settle instead of alarm you. Everyone who has ever lived is inside that one small blue circle. Every lullaby ever sung, every fire ever built against the dark, every first step taken by a child who did not yet know the word for moon, all of it, all of us, riding together on a single point of light in a sky with no other lights nearby to compare it to. Because from the lunar surface, the sun is a white coin, and the stars, oddly, refuse to show themselves in the glare of the ground below. No twinkling map of familiar constellations to anchor the eye. No soft haze of atmosphere to blur the edges into something friendlier. Just the black and the gray, and that one blue jewel, holding everything you have ever known inside a curve you could trace with one fingertip on the inside of the visor. Some of the astronauts who saw it said afterward that this, more than any rock sample or footprint, was the discovery they had actually traveled for. That they left Earth to explore the moon and came back instead having truly seen Earth for the first time, as a single unbroken thing. A place with no lines drawn on it, no borders visible from that distance, nothing to separate any one sleeping person from any other. It is a strange kind of homesickness that only becomes possible once you have left, and a strange kind of comfort that only becomes possible once you are far enough away to see the whole of what you are homesick for. It would be easy for this thought to tip towards something cold, the vast indifferent dark, the terrible distances, the fragile dot lost in it all. But let it tip the other way instead, the way a boat leans toward the shore rather than the open water. Because smallness, seen from here, is not the same as insignificance. A seed is small. A held breath is small. The moment just before sleep, when the whole day finally sets its weight down, is small too. And none of these things are lesser for their size. They are simply held, cupped inside something larger than themselves. The way your own body right now is held by a mattress that does not need to be told how to hold you. To be small inside something vast is not to be lost inside it. It is to belong to a scale where your own difficulties, the ones that keep circling through your mind on other nights, quietly lose their grip. Because there is finally, physically, more room around them than they ever needed. Consider how it must have felt, standing on that doorstep, to hold up a gloved thumb and find it wide enough to hide an entire species worth of worry. Every unfinished conversation, every unpaid bill, every argument replayed too many times before sleep, all of it, still real, still yours, and yet, for one long, unhurried breath, small enough to vanish behind a thumbnail held against the dark. This is not a trick to make your troubles disappear. It is simply a reminder of the room they are floating in. A worry the size of a house feels enormous inside a bedroom. The very same worry, seen from a doorstep 384,400 kilometers away, is still exactly the size it always was. It is only the room around it that has grown. And it is that growing room, that widening frame, which lets the shoulders drop and the breath lengthen. Think of the door in this story, the one that swung open once on a set of footprints in 1969 and swung shut behind us. One dismantled assembly line and one retired engineer at a time. From where you are lying, it can start to feel enormous. A 50-year gap, a whole civilization's worth of will and money and hard-won engineering, standing between us and a place we already visited. But stand where that astronaut is standing, on the doorstep itself, and look up, and you will see the truth of it plainly. That door, all of it, the entire history of rockets and budgets and locked keys and rusted hinges, is impossibly, almost comically tiny against that sky. It is smaller than the blue circle overhead. It is smaller than one country on that circle, smaller than one bedroom window in one house, in one town on that circle, the very window you might be lying near right now. The whole grand difficulty of getting back is a small human-sized story unfolding on the surface of a small human-sized world, and both of them, door and world, fit easily, gently, into a sky that does not ask them to be any bigger than they are. So let something loosen in you, the way your shoulders loosen when you finally set down something you have been carrying without noticing its weight. Nothing about tonight's question needs solving by you. Not the fuel budgets, not the frozen supply chains, not the 14-day nights or the Delta V ledger balanced ounce by ounce against gravity. None of it is yours to carry into sleep. You are not the engineer tasked with rebuilding the door, and you are not required to understand every rivet of how it will be rebuilt. You are only the listener, lying safe under the very same moon that astronaut once stood beneath, looking up at the very same slow gray face that has watched over every human bedtime since the first one. The moon does not need you awake to keep existing. The door does not need you awake to eventually open. Both of them will still be exactly where they are tomorrow, patient as stone, whether or not your eyes are open to see them. There is something almost tender in that thought, if you let it be tender rather than lonely. The astronaut on that airless doorstep, dwarfed by the blue circle overhead, was never diminished by that dwarfing. They were, in that instant, one of the most held human beings who has ever existed, wrapped by a silence with no weather in it, watched over by every person who ever lived, all of them riding together inside that one small light. And you, right now, under a roof, under a blanket, are held in the very same way, by the very same physics, by the very same patient turning of a world that keeps circling, regardless of whether the door to its neighbor stands open or closed. The scale of the sky is not a measure of how alone you are. It is a measure of how much room there is around you to simply rest. And this is, in the end, the quiet reason the long walk back is still worth taking at all. Not conquest, not a flag planted for its own sake, not a race to be won a second time, but something closer to a return home to gather what was left behind. Because that same doorstep the astronaut once stood on, dwarfed by Earth's blue light, is not empty. Tucked into shadows nearby, in places the sun has never once reached, something has been waiting there far longer than any of us have existed. Something patient, something cold, something that turns the whole difficult walk from a memory we are chasing into a future we are building toward, if we can only find our way back to where it sleeps. And still under that same black sky, small and unbothered by your smallness, there is a reason worth carrying with you down toward sleep, a reason the door is worth reaching at all. Because it is not only a door back to somewhere we have been. Hidden in its farthest corners is something we never actually touched the first time, something that changes what waiting on the other side could mean. At the moon's south pole there are craters so deep and walled at such a stubborn angle that sunlight has never once reached their floors. Not in a human lifetime, not in 10,000 of them. Some have held their darkness, unbroken, for perhaps 2 billion years, a night so old it was already ancient when the first simple cells were learning to divide on Earth. Scientists call these places cold traps, and the name is almost tender in its plainness. Pockets of permanent shadow, patient beyond any patience we have a word for, where temperatures fall low enough to hold on to whatever drifts into them and never lets it go. And what has drifted into them and stayed is water. Ice, laced faintly through the regolith, sleeping in a cold so deep and so unbroken that it has simply had nowhere to go and no warmth to nudge it loose. You can let that settle for a moment the way you would let a hand settle over yours, there is frozen water on the moon, waiting in the dark. The way this whole night has been waiting in you. It would be easy to hear that and think only of thirst, of a canteen refilled on some future doorstep. But water asks for more imagination than that, and it repays it. Split gently apart by electricity, water becomes two of the simplest and most useful things a body venturing out into vacuum could ask for: oxygen, breathable and unhurried in the lungs, and hydrogen, which burns. Put them back together in a rocket engine, and you are not carrying fuel from home anymore. You are finding it already there, folded into the shadows, asking only to be unfolded. This is the quiet difference between visiting a place and living somewhere. A visitor brings everything in a suitcase and leaves nothing behind. Someone who stays learns to draw water from the ground under their own house. The ice in those craters is, in a very literal sense, a place to draw water from. It could become the air inside a habitat and the push behind a departing engine, both drawn from the same frozen dark that has been waiting since before there were eyes anywhere to see it. Think for a moment of what that removes from the equation, because the removing is the whole point. Every kilogram lifted off the Earth costs fuel simply to lift the fuel that will lift it. The same tyranny of the rocket equation that made the outward journey so costly in the first place. A tank of water carried up from home is one of the heaviest, most stubborn kinds of cargo there is. A tank of water already waiting in a shadowed crater, needing only to be gathered and warmed and split apart, costs nothing at all to launch, because it never has to leave the ground it came from. This is why so much careful attention has turned toward those cold traps, not because water itself is rare in the universe, but because water already there, already patient, already resting exactly where it is needed, is worth more than almost anything that could be carried to meet it. And the ice is not the only thing folded into that ground. The regolith itself, that fine, restless dust that will be named more fully a little later in the night, when we speak of how harshly it clings, carries oxygen bound up inside its own minerals, locked into the very rock and grit that covers the surface. Bound oxygen, waiting the way the ice waits, asking only for the right patient process to be coaxed free. Between the water hidden in permanent shadow and the oxygen locked in ordinary ground, the moon holds something almost startling in a place we once assumed held only silence and dust, the beginnings of a pantry. Not abundance, not ease, but enough. Enough that the door, once opened, would no longer require every single thing to be carried through it by hand. This is the quiet hinge on which the whole difficulty of returning turns. Apollo was a visit, and visits do not need pantries. A visit needs only enough supplies for the length of the stay, carried in, used up, carried home in memory and rock samples and photographs. 6 landings touched the surface for a matter of days apiece across 3 years, planted flags, gathered what could be gathered, and left before the ground had time to become familiar. What is being built now is not shaped like a visit. It is shaped like the slow, unhurried work of moving somewhere. The difference between camping overnight in a place you love and building the smallest possible room to live in, one wall at a time. A station called Gateway is meant to orbit the moon the way a porch sits outside a house, a small outpost where crews can dock, transfer, and stage their descent, returning to it between trips to the surface below. Surface habitats, still taking shape on drawing boards and in test articles here on Earth, are meant to do what no Apollo module ever needed to do: outlast a single visit, host a crew through weeks instead of days, and eventually through something closer to a season. None of it is about planting one more flag. It is about learning, patiently and by doing, how a small group of people keeps itself alive somewhere that owes them nothing. Picture it a little longer, if it helps the mind soften rather than sharpen. A porch in orbit, its windows facing a gray world close enough to touch with a glance, a low structure on the surface below, walled thick enough to hold a breathable hush inside while outside the ground remains what it has always been. Bright and airless in the long lunar day, black and starved of warmth through the long lunar night. Inside, ordinary things happen slowly and without drama. Water drawn up from a shadowed reservoir a short drive away, filtered, split, some of it breathed, and some of it stored for the engines waiting outside. It is less a monument than a household, humble in its daily rhythms, built one supply run and one tested system at a time. There is nothing about it that needs to be fast. There is a great deal about it that needs to be right, checked and rechecked, the way any home worth staying in is checked before the first night spent inside it. And underneath even that ambition sits a further, quieter one. The moon is close, a few days coast. Not the better part of a year sealed inside a spacecraft. That closeness makes it something rarer than a destination. It makes it a rehearsal space, a low-stakes proving ground 3 days from home instead of many months from it. Every habitat tested there, every system for drawing water from shadowed ice, every lesson in keeping a small enclosed world breathable and warm against a hostile outside, is a lesson borrowed forward toward Mars, a place so much farther that mistakes made on the way cannot be undone by a quick return flight. The moon, in this light, becomes something almost tender in its usefulness, not the whole ambition, but the practice field beside it. The place where a species can fail small and safely before it dares to fail somewhere it could not come home from. So when the question of the night asks why going back is harder than it looks, here is part of the honest answer. Sitting quietly beside all the rocket equations and vanished supply chains, because this time, the goal was never simply to return. Flags and footprints was a sentence written to be finished in days. What is being attempted now cannot be finished at all in the same way, because it does not aim at an ending. It aims at staying, at drawing water from frozen shadow and air from ordinary ground, at building something that does not need to be dismantled the moment the visit is over. A visit can be planned in a decade of urgency. A home takes longer, because a home has to work every day, not just the day it opens its door for the first time. And how strange, how almost lovely, that all of this, the cold traps, the 2 billion years of unbroken dark, the water folded so patiently into shadow that it simply never had reason to leave, was not discovered in some single triumphant instant. It was learned the way most enduring things are learned, slowly, by generations who never met each other, each one adding a small patient piece to a picture none of them would live to see finished. Long before any spacecraft carried an instrument capable of tasting for water in that permanent dark, someone else was already looking upward with far humbler tools, already beginning the walk that would end, centuries later, at the edge of those shadowed craters. And it is there, at the very beginning of that long looking, that the story turns next. And if the plan now is to live behind the door, not merely to knock on it, then it helps to remember something tender about that door. It was never really locked to knowing, only to walking. Long before any engine burned toward it, before any footprint pressed itself into that gray powder, The moon was already being visited in the only way most of us will ever visit anything truly distant, with attention, with a lens, with the unhurried patience of someone deciding to look closely at what everyone else had only glanced at. Picture a man in Padua in the autumn of 1609, tilting a small brass telescope of his own making toward a sky he had looked at 1,000 times before. Galileo Galilei was not the first person to notice the moon had markings on its face. Every culture that ever told stories about a face in the moon had noticed that. But he was among the first to understand that those shadows meant something physical, that they were the long shadows of mountains, the dark floors of what he mistook for seas, a whole landscape lying out there under real sunlight, real dawn, real dusk. He sketched what he saw by hand, ink on paper, craters and ridges rendered in the low light of an oil lamp, and in doing that small, unglamorous thing he performed the very first step of the long walk this whole night has been describing. He proved, without ceremony, in a rented room, that the moon was a place, not a symbol, not a lamp hung in the dark for our convenience. A place with a floor you could imagine standing on 360 years before anyone actually would. There is something worth lingering on in that image, a single unhurried person, alone at night, turning attention toward something enormous and far away, and simply recording what was actually there, rather than what tradition had always assumed was there. Before Galileo, most of the learned world pictured the moon as a smooth, unblemished sphere, a kind of polished lamp fixed in the heavens, because the old philosophy insisted that anything above the earth had to be perfect. His sketches ended that assumption without a word of protest from anyone. They showed a surface pocked and layered and lit unevenly. Mountains catching the sun while their neighboring valleys still lay in darkness, exactly the way any rough landscape on Earth would look at sunrise. It was a small correction, made in a small room, with humble equipment, and it turned out to be the very first mark on a map that would eventually guide real travelers. For 3.5 centuries after that first sketch, the walk continued mostly through eyes and glass, and careful, unhurried arithmetic. Astronomers charting the moon's librations, its faint tilting wobble that lets us eventually see 59% of its surface without ever leaving home. Cartographers slowly filling in its seas and naming them after moods: tranquility, serenity, fertility, as if already sensing that this was a place worth being at peace with. Telescopes grew larger, lenses grew clearer, and generation by generation the moon's face became more familiar, more mapped, more known, even as it remained entirely untouched. Then, in the middle of the last century, the pace of the walk changed. It stopped being only observation, conducted from a comfortable distance, and became, for the first time, contact. In September of 1959, a Soviet spacecraft called Luna 2 became the first human-made object to reach another world at all, striking the lunar surface at speed. No landing, no return, just the fact of arrival, a fist knock rather than a hand on the latch. 7 years later, in 1966, Luna 9 managed something far gentler, the first true soft landing, a small capsule easing itself down and opening like a flower to send back the first photographs ever taken from the surface of another celestial body. Close-up views of a rocky, textured ground that many scientists had feared might swallow a spacecraft whole in fine, bottomless dust. It did not swallow anything. The ground held. That single plain fact, the ground holds, was one of the most important discoveries of the whole era, because it told everyone that a landing, and eventually a person, was possible. Around the same years, American Ranger probes were doing something almost the opposite of tender, deliberately crash landing, cameras firing continuously through their final minutes of flight, sending back thousands of images of ever finer detail right up until the moment of impact ended the transmission, a kind of last long look, traded for the mission itself in service of maps that later missions would come to rely on. And after the Rangers came the Surveyor landers, patient this time rather than sacrificial, extending small mechanical arms to test the actual chemistry and mechanics of the soil, letting engineers measure, for the first time, whether lunar ground could truly bear the weight of a spacecraft, and before long, a boot. Every one of these missions was a small emissary sent ahead of the crews, unglamorous and largely unremembered now, feeling out the doorstep in the dark, so that when astronauts finally arrived, the way had already been half-walked for them by patient, unmanned hands. Then came the years already spoken of tonight, the 6 landings, the rocks carried home in sealed boxes, and it turned out those rocks were not simply souvenirs. Back in laboratories on Earth, scientists dated them, sliced them thin enough for light to pass through, studied their mineral grains under microscopes, and in doing so silently rewrote the story of where the moon itself came from. The leading understanding to emerge from that patient work is that the moon is not a captured wanderer or a separate creation at all, but something closer to a sibling born from violence and then tempered by time, material flung into orbit from an ancient cataclysmic collision between the young Earth and a Mars-sized body, the debris slowly gathering itself into a sphere and cooling over ages into the pale, familiar shape now hanging outside a bedroom window. The door, it turns out, is made partly of earth. It always was a little bit of home. The walk did not end at Apollo 17, it simply changed its rhythm again, from footsteps to orbits. In 1994, a small mission called Clementine circled the moon and, among its many measurements, returned radar signals from the darkest floors of certain polar craters that hinted, faintly, at something reflective hiding in the permanent shadow. A whisper, not yet a certainty. 4 years later, in 1998, Lunar Prospector carried a neutron spectrometer into lunar orbit and detected an excess of hydrogen concentrated at both poles, the kind of signature that water ice, and only water ice in any real abundance, tends to leave behind. Neither mission could say the word water with full confidence. They could only say, "Look here, look closer. Something is different about this cold and shadowed ground." It took another decade of patient looking to turn that whisper into something firmer. In 2008, India's Chandrayaan-1 carried an instrument that, among its findings, detected the unmistakable spectral fingerprint of water molecules and hydroxyl spread thinly across the lunar surface. And the following year, in 2009, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter arrived to map the poles in extraordinary detail, while a companion probe deliberately impacted one of those permanently shadowed craters and watched the debris plume for the telltale signature of ice. It was there. After centuries of glances and decades of near misses and whispers, the cold traps at the bottom of the world finally answered. Laid end to end like this, the whole history stops looking like a list of separate missions and starts looking like exactly what it always was, one long, unbroken walk, taken up in relay by generation after generation, each one covering only a few more steps than the last, and then handing the path onward. A man with a telescope in 1609. A spacecraft with a camera in 1966. A geologist with a rock slice under lamplight in the 1970s. An instrument with a spectrometer in 2008. None of them saw the whole journey. Each of them simply moved the door a little closer, without ever quite reaching it themselves, trusting that someone later would. That is, in the end, a very familiar kind of knowing, the kind that does not arrive all at once, however it may feel from the outside looking in. It gathers in the dark for a long while, unnoticed, accumulating in small, unremarkable increments, a sketch here, a photograph there, a measurement that means little on its own, and everything once it is finally set beside all the others that came before it. There is no single dramatic moment where the truth switches on. There is only the long accumulation, and then, one day, a sentence that can finally be said with confidence: "There is water on the moon." A sentence that 4 centuries of unhurried, unglamorous looking had been patiently building toward the entire time, without ever once announcing that this was what it was doing. And perhaps that is the last, tenderest thing worth carrying from all of it. Understanding so often behaves exactly like rest does. Nothing seems to happen for the longest while. Attention is paid, small things are noticed, questions are set down and picked back up by other hands decades later, and the whole process feels, from the inside, indistinguishable from waiting. Then, without any particular fanfare, without any single instant you could point to and call the moment it happened, you find that you have arrived somewhere new. A door a little closer than it was. A mind a little further from the evening it began in, drifting now toward whatever quiet is waiting on the other side of tonight. Tonight has been about a door, the one we once walked through, and the faint click of it locking itself behind us, almost without our noticing, decades ago. Tonight has been about the long road back to that door, the fuel, the calculations, the patient, unglamorous work of rebuilding machines we once knew by heart and somehow let ourselves forget. Tonight has been about the doorstep itself, that pale threshold overhead, harsh and lovely all at once, dust and silence, and a light that falls without any air to soften it. And tonight has been about the walk itself, the unhurried return, the reason it matters to go back at all, and how, mile by mile, year by year, we have been finding our way toward the path again. None of this needs anything from you tonight. Not the dates, not the names of rockets or landers, not the numbers of days between launches, not the order of the regions, not which one came first, not whether you followed every word or drifted off somewhere in the middle and missed a few. All of that can drift loose now, the way a held breath finally drifts loose. You were only ever here to listen and to rest, and both of those things you have already done well enough, simply by staying this long. Somewhere above the roof, above the clouds, if there are clouds tonight, the moon is right there, exactly where it has always been, patient in a way nothing on the ground quite manages to be. It is not waiting for us, not really. It has nowhere else to be and no sense of time passing the way we do. But there is something tender in imagining it that way. A doorstep left lit long after everyone assumed the house was empty. Another quiet exploration is already waiting on the screen nearby, drifting up on its own in a moment, and there is nothing you need to do about that either. Just let it begin on its own, the way this one did, and let it carry you further down if you are not already gone. Before you go, here is only a small thing to loosen into. Nothing to answer, nothing to type, nothing to solve tonight or ever. If you could stand on that far pale ground for just one breath, boots sinking into dust that has waited untouched for longer than any of us can hold in our heads, what would you choose to leave behind there as your own small mark before turning back toward home? You don't have to know. You don't have to decide. Let the question sit there, unanswered, small and harmless as a pebble at the bottom of a very calm pool. And let yourself sink down past it, further than it can follow. Your breathing has already slowed, on its own, the way it always does when nothing more is being asked of it. Your eyes are heavier now behind closed lids, heavier than they were even a minute ago. And that heaviness is not something to fight, only something to allow, the way you would allow a warm hand resting lightly at the back of your neck. Whatever thoughts are left can keep drifting past, unfinished, unclaimed, like faint lights seen once through a train window and then gone. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing left to carry. The door has closed softly behind you too now, and on this side of it there is only the dark and the low hush of your own breath, and the bed beneath you, holding you the way it always has. Rest now, all the way down, past thought, past the last faint edges of tonight's story, into whatever hush is waiting for you there. Sleep well.